is the new 2025 Porsche 911 Carrera T, the brand new 992.2 model, and it's a surprisingly analog and old school car considering it's the latest and greatest from Porsche. Today I'm going to review the new Carrera T and show you what I mean, and I'll also show you all of this car's quirks and features. Today's video is sponsored by Cars and Bids, which is my online car auction website for modern enthusiast cars. Cars and Bids has around 600,000 registered users all participating in our auctions of cool, special, exciting cars like this, and this, and this, and this. If you're looking to buy or sell an enthusiast car from the modern era, do it on carsandbids.com. All right, time for the quirks and features of the new 911 Carrera T, starting with the basics. So, the 992.2, that's the newest version of the newest version of the Porsche 911, the 992 model. It's coming out for the 25 model year, and the Carrera T is intended to be the lightweight, purist, focused model, the one you get if you want your 911 as pure and old school as possible. Now, that's been true of previous Carrera T models. It was always sort of the lightweight, pure version, and that remains true for the 992.2, but some things have changed. Specifically, this car now has a starting sticker price of around $136,000, which is 10 grand more than the outgoing Carrera T, and massive money by anyone's measure. Now, part of the reason for the increase in price is that this car has a lot more equipment compared to the old Carrera T. You get Porsche's sport suspension, they call it PASM. You get the Sport Chrono package, which I'll show you inside the car later. You get rear axle steering, standard on all Carrera T models. You get brakes from the 911 Carrera S. There's a lot of nice upgrades, but that's a lot of stuff that's been added on to the lightweight, pure, focused 911. Nonetheless, that's the situation. And despite all of those additions, this is still the lightest version of the 992.2 Carrera. That's what Porsche says. So, with the basics out of the way, let's talk quirks and features. One of the big quirks of the new 992.2 911 is that there are versions of that car with a hybrid powertrain. For the first time in the Porsche 911, hybrid technology. Now, the Carrera T is not one of those versions. This does not have the new hybrid engine. Instead, it has a twin-turbo 3-liter flat six, makes about 390 horsepower and about 330 pound-feet of torque. Porsche says 0 to 60 in the low 4-second range for this car. As for quirks under the hood of the new 911, probably the quirkiest quirk is that when you open the hood, you don't get access to the engine. This has been true on Porsche 911 models for a while now. It still blows me away that the Porsche 911, one of the most enthusiast-friendly tinker with your car vehicles, doesn't give its owners access to the engine, but that is indeed the situation under, it's not even the hood, it's just a flap in back. You do get access to fans back here, as you can see. And then there's some caps that you can twist off to add oil or coolant if that's what you want to do, but no engine access in back. Now, on top of the non-engine access flap, you still have the weird vertical third brake light that you had in previous Porsche 992 models. Now, surrounding the third brake light, you have blue trim, specifically these very subtle blue vertical lines on the back of the car. You wouldn't necessarily notice they're blue unless you look closely, but less subtle is the blue accents throughout the rest of the exterior, specifically the wheels, which are definitely a lot of blue. It's kind of an interesting look for this car. I'm not sure if I love it, but it's there. You also have blue trim on this giant side graphic, as you can see, telling you what car this is, and blue trim on the hood as well, again announcing what vehicle you're looking at. You also have blue trim for the rear badge. 911 Carrera T back here is trimmed in blue. I'm not sure if I love all of the blue trim changes on the outside of this car, but it certainly is distinctive, kind of gives this car its own unique look compared to other 911 models, which all have a tendency to look pretty much the same. But while the blue trim is opinion splitting, but generally good, I have to say one thing I absolutely do not like: a little sticker in the rear window that says Porsche and shows a gear pattern, celebrating the fact that this is a manual transmission car with a factory applied bumper sticker. Frankly, it's a little cringe, and you have that on both sides of the rear windows. If I bought one of these, the very first thing I would do is remove the "look at me, I'm a manual" bumper sticker. In fact, this car celebrates its manual transmission-ness in a few different places. There's a little plaque next to the gear lever itself inside the car that says MT, which of course stands for manual transmission. And then over on the passenger side of the dashboard, you also have an image of the gear pattern, again reminding everybody that this car has a manual transmission. Frankly, again, a little cringe, goes a little far, but it does underscore one really important point of the new Carrera T. Specifically, this car is now only available with a manual transmission. The previous Carrera T was manual or automatic, and apparently 70% of buyers chose the manual. The car is now manual only. And it's not the 7-speed manual from the previous Carrera T. Instead, it's moved back to a 6-speed manual transmission, although Porsche says this is not the same 6-speed manual that you find in the 911 GT3. Both 911s, both 6-speed manuals, different transmission. But indeed a manual, as the car reminds. Now, also new for the Carrera T this year, worth pointing out, beyond the mandatory stick shift, is a cabriolet body style. Previously, the Carrera T was only offered as a coupe, like this car, but a convertible is now available as well. And since I'm talking quirks and features of this car, I might as well discuss the exterior changes to the 992.2 model compared to the previous one, since this is the first one of these I've reviewed. Now, with that said, the changes are tremendously minimal. Only the most exquisitely meticulous Porsche enthusiasts will really be able to spot the difference, but there are changes. In the front, the air dam is different. The .2 version doesn't have these little painted panels that you can see on the .1 that sort of connect the top and the bottom. Instead, you have a wider opening up front. Now, worth pointing out here that the Carrera T that I have here doesn't have the weird vertical slats that this car had when Porsche first announced it. That might be specific just to the GTS model that Porsche was showing when they revealed the 992.2, but regardless, the Carrera T doesn't have them. Now, in back, the other change, again, very small, is on that little trunk lid with the third brake light. There used to be 9 vertical slats on either side of the brake light. So 9 on the left, 9 on the right, and then the brake light had 2, so it said 992. Well, now there's only 5 on each side. An incredibly minor distinction, but some changes to the 992 model on the outside. But anyway, next we climb inside the new Carrera T, and the first thing you'll probably notice in here, the first cool detail, is that the manual transmission shifter is made of wood. And not just that, it's open pore walnut. None of this over-varnished glossy wood. Instead, you have this nice feel and look, very gentlemanly, very exquisite, and certainly will appeal to the type of Porsche enthusiast that they're trying to appeal to. Let's just leave it at that. Now, the other thing that you'll notice is behind the front seats, there are no back seats, which is unusual for most Porsche 911 models that do have back seats. In this car, they're optional. Now, it's a free option, so you can just decide back seats, no back seats. It doesn't cost you anything, but if you want the most pure version possible, Porsche figured might as well give it the option to delete back seats, which obviously pures up the interior and probably saves some weight. Now, it's worth pointing out that if you get the Carrera T Cabriolet, that comes with 4 seats only, front and rear, and you cannot delete the back seats from the convertible. Now, other interesting quirks and features worth pointing out in here, the blue trim in this car is very nice. Matching what you have on the outside, you can see blue stitching on the steering wheel, which looks very good. You have blue trim in the center console here, and then some more blue trim on the dashboard. You even have blue trim on the carpets where it says Porsche, and blue trim all over the seats, from from 911 stitched into the headrest all the way down. All this blue trimming on the seats looks very nice. And indeed, the seats themselves are a point worth mentioning in this car because they look nice too. You have these cloth seat centers, may not be the highest in upscale luxury, but it does feel like a pure old school 911 model with the cloth seat centers and sort of this checker pattern design. Worth pointing out though, these are not the only seats available in the Carrera T. In case you don't like the cloth seat centers, you can get rid of them, but you shouldn't because they're cool. Also worth pointing out, another specific detail to the Carrera T, Porsche says they have removed some sound deadening from the Carrera T to make the interior, the cabin, louder than a regular 911. Two reasons for that. Number one, to save weight. Number two, so that you can hear the engine and the exhaust note better when you're sitting inside the car. Now, the other really big detail that's been a little controversial about the new 992.2 model is that the gauge cluster has gone completely digital. In the past, there was a central gauge that was an old analog tachometer. That is gone now, and you are fully digital in here. And indeed, these gauges are pretty impressive, actually. There's a little wheel on the steering wheel that you can use to scroll through the different gauge options, and there are many. You can see various configurable displays depending on what you want, a full screen map or more vehicle information, or you can even show a night vision display if you want to see it. Yes, night vision, which uses like heat-seeking technology to show what's in front of you while you're driving along. Ah, yes, the purist 911, the most lightweight, high-performance, back-to-basics 911, now with night vision. Actually, I like a night vision feature in a car like this. It's surprisingly useful, especially on country roads at night, twilight, you have deer. You can spot it with this system pretty easily. It's nice to have, but it does seem to go a little against the theory of the purist 911. I'm sure it's not standard, but it's equipped in this one. Now, on to the infotainment screen, the other big screen in this interior, and like other Porsche models, the infotainment is excellent in this car. No major changes compared to 992, at least it doesn't seem like it to me. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are standard, and the system is still very intuitive, very responsive to your touch, very easy and simple to use. Now, this infotainment system, a few interesting things worth pointing out. For one, this is how you access the Sport Chrono system in this car. So Sport Chrono, like I said, standard on the Carrera T now. It comes with this stopwatch on the dashboard, which looks kind of cool, but the system goes beyond that. It's sort of a lap timer. You can compare previous laps, etc., and it's all accessible through the infotainment system in case you're someone who wants to use this car on a track. It's also worth pointing out that this car comes standard with an auto rev match feature, which Porsche calls auto blip. You can turn that on or off in the infotainment system, although I really like it, and I think it's fantastic to use, as I'll mention in the driving portion in a little bit, but if you'd rather rev match downshifts completely on your own, you can turn it off in here if you want to. There's also a performance app in this car that gives you real-time performance figures as you drive along. So like how much brake you're pushing, how much accelerator, exactly your tire temperature and pressure, and how much power you're using, and you can watch that as you drive if you want. Interestingly, directly next to that app, there's an app called Video, which gives you access to all of your streaming services. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy that kind of sums up modern Porsche. The performance app for you to monitor exactly how much power you're using, and then the video app which lets you browse Hulu from inside the car. Now, beyond all that stuff, there's not much new or notable in here compared to the outgoing 992.1 model, but there are still a few quirks and features worth pointing out. For one, this little row of switches in the center control stack. Still some physical buttons in this car, and here you can turn on your hazard lights, turn off traction control, sport suspension. There's also a diamond button that can be configured, and your sport exhaust is located here too. That's how you turn it on. Right below that, you have your climate controls. Again, physical buttons, not yet integrated into the screen, which I think most people will be happy about. Also interesting in this car is in the center, you have a cup holder. No surprise there, but you can remove it if you want. Just push the switch at the top of the cup holder, and then it comes right out, and and then you don't have it anymore. If for some reason you have a vehement anti-cup holder stance, you can get rid of it and then it's not there. Although there is still one little cup holder on the passenger side tucked into the dashboard, sort of hidden in there behind this panel. It's still there no matter how much you hate cup holders. You can't easily get rid of that one. And final interesting item worth noting here, in this car, the starter is still on the left side of the steering wheel. It has turned into a button. You don't need to insert a key or twist anything. It's just a start button, but it's still there, a nod to Porsche's old school racing days and the famous Le Mans start, although I suspect most people with Macan EVs and new 911s are not exactly doing that. Nonetheless, the button remains in its traditional Porsche location. And finally, we move up to the front trunk, the cargo area in this car, which frankly is uninteresting. It's like every other Porsche 911 front trunk. It is surprisingly large. You can get a decent amount of stuff in here, but there's not really all that much to talk about. I am, of course, much more interested in getting behind the wheel of the new Carrera T and seeing how it drives, so let's do that now. All right, driving the new Carrera T. And I gotta tell you, I've been driving this car already for a while, and it is magnificent. The rev matching feature, I just love. The shifter and transmission, I just love. You know, it's such a shifter and clutch. It's such a shame that, you know, the manual transmission has gone away to the degree that it has, because some of these automakers have done such an incredible job of refining the manual transmission over so many years to make it just perfect right before its death. And Porsche is probably the best example of that. I mean, they make truly fantastic manuals with a perfectly weighted clutch and a perfectly weighted shifter. The clutch is a little springier than I would expect, not quite as linear as I've seen in other Porsche models, but still better than any other clutch you're going to find on a new car. But the shifter weight is just perfect. The way it slots into gear, the mechanical feel of it, it's really an excellent feeling, excellent driving shifter, transmission, rev match combo. And it's funny that it has rev match as standard, because you don't need it. Any half-decent manual driver can easily rev match this car. It's just so easy to rev. It revs well, the clutch is easy to use, the accelerator, I mean, it all just jives so beautifully that you don't really need it. But it's there to make for perfect rev matches, which it does. This car is also really fast. I've been driving it around, and I'm astonished by just how quick it is. You know, it's not a turbo, it's not a GT3, it's not a Carrera GTS. It's essentially a base model car that's been breathed on just a little bit to add a little more power, but man, is the performance level just absolutely fantastic in this car. The acceleration is just so unbelievably strong. Mid-range power is fantastic. It feels just lovely, absolutely lovely to drive. Really do love the mid-range power. That's been a little bit of a drawback of some previous Porsche models. You know, I love the 993s and the 996s, but in order to really get a good mid-range acceleration, so say 50 miles an hour and you floor it, you kind of have to go turbo for those cars and then gear down. And this has the performance of an old 911 turbo and not that old 911 turbo. Everybody's disappointed that the 911 pricing has gotten so high, and that's reasonable, but when you look at the performance level of this car, I mean, this is where 911 turbos were not that long ago. Plus, you get a manual transmission, you get a nice modern car with great modern tech. Oh, man, it's just such a great package. The feeling of the acceleration is just excellent, absolutely excellent. Linear, smooth power delivery. You wouldn't know this car is turbocharged. It really feels like a just naturally aspirated, wonderfully linear, perfectly designed flat six. Now, one complaint I have about the 991, and it does indeed apply to this car, is that it's just gotten a little big, and that is true. There's no question about that. The steering is still tremendously precise, but that's something that you can kind of do with power steering. You can sort of make it immediately responsive. In this car, they've really dialed in the steering sharpness, which is wonderful, but when you really start to throw it around corners, you can feel the size of the car, especially if you have experience driving the older 911 models, the old air-cooled cars. They were tossable and sort of dynamic in a way that you just can't engineer your way out of when it comes to physical size. You do have this sort of kind of constant pervasive feel of, hey, you know, this car is a little on the bigger side for a true focused sports car. At least if your point of reference is other smaller, older 911s or other really dynamic and tossable sports cars, like in my case with Carrera GT. It's the first 992.2 I've driven, but when I think about like what this car is and what it delivers, I think to myself, why would anybody want anything more than this? You know, GT3s beat you up, turbos are tremendously expensive. This has the power level, the performance, the fun. I mean, this car really delivers all of it in just an absolutely amazing package, more than I was even expecting, more enjoyable, more exciting than I was even expecting. Been a while since I've driven a 992, and I've forgotten just how special these cars are and how absolutely wonderfully they drive. And I'm impressed with this one. Personally, I'm still kind of more of a mid-engine Porsche guy. I don't really have the ego tied to the 911 thing, and I think those cars do drive a little bit better because they're a little bit smaller and they're a little bit more dynamic. But in the world of 911s, it's hard to beat this. Manual transmission, old school, it feels absolutely perfect. Just wonderful to drive. And I'm thrilled to be able to drive it. And so that's the new 2025 Porsche 911 Carrera T. This car has an excellent blend of old and new. It's the latest version of the 911 with all the great modern tech, but it still has a lot of the cool stuff that we've always loved about the Porsche 911. This is an expensive car, but it has a lot of amazing qualities. And now it's time to give the new Carrera T a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 68 out of 100, which puts the Carrera T here against similar modern Porsche models. It equals the GT3, though the GT3 gets a better weekend score. Overall, this is one of my favorite new 911s. The ST is better, but it's so much more expensive and exhaustingly hard to get unless you're part of the Porsche cult. The Carrera T offers a very similar driving experience with vastly cheaper pricing and wider availability. Truthfully, it might just be the best overall 911.